Welcome to today's show. Today's guest is a young woman named Silvia Ulloa, who is originally from Costa Rica but has lived in Stockholm, Sweden, and studied social anthropology at the University of Stockholm. The reason why Silvia is here today is because she has written reports about Assyrians. Hi and welcome to Assyria TV.
Thank you for having me here.
Would you tell us a little about yourself and your background?
Sure. So as you said, I'm originally from Costa Rica, but I've lived in several places around Latin America and also in the Middle East. And now I've lived in Sweden for almost 4 years. I recently completed a master's in social anthropology at Stockholm University, and my focus was on Assyrians and Assyrian identities in diaspora, especially in Sweden.
How did you know about the Assyrians? Because we are mainly known as the Christians of Iraq, and many people mistake us for being Christian Arabs. So how did you know about specifically the ethnic group Assyrians?
In my third year of college, of my undergraduate, I lived in Jordan for a year while I completed an internship. And while I was there, I also volunteered at a place that had a lot of Iraqi refugees. There I met several families or different individuals who I realized, yes, of course, they were Christians. That was maybe the first way that I realized that they were a bit different. But then I realized that they spoke another language and that they culturally maybe didn't see themselves as Arabs, of course. That really piqued my interest. I wanted to know more about this community, and I was also very interested in that they were a minority community. And from there, I started to, my thesis in my undergraduate was more general. It was not about Assyrians. But it led to me becoming more interested in particularly in knowing what happened to this community once they had left their homeland.
So you ended up in Sweden to study. It had nothing to do with Assyrians or to write about Assyrians, or was it connected? How did you end up here?
So oddly enough, it was kind of connected because after I finished my thesis, or during the time that I was finishing my undergraduate degree, I applied for what is called a Fulbright scholarship. And it's there's several different kinds of this. It's a bigger program, but I applied for one that is a research grant. And I specifically applied to come to Sweden because I was very interested in what happened to these Assyrians after they had been resettled, because many of the ones that I met in Jordan, they were waiting for resettlement, not so much to Sweden, but maybe some to the US, some to Australia, to different countries. And so I specifically chose Sweden because of this community. So they did kind of bring me here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you knew that there was a lot of a big community of Assyrians in Sweden.
Definitely. After, as I said, my undergraduate thesis was not so focused on Assyrians, but of course I started to read more about these different communities, and I needed to know more about these different groups. In particular, Assyrians unfortunately represent a very large portion of the people who have left Iraq after 2003. And I was just looking where they were all going, and I noticed that Sweden was one of the biggest communities, especially proportionally. Assyrians are very visible here, so that really drew me here.
Oh, that was interesting that they actually made you come here,
yeah,
in a way. Okay, so we're here in Sweden and you studied, and I know that you had a lot of contact with the Assyrian Federation of Sweden. How did you get in contact with the Federation?
So initially, when I first arrived, of course, I had to make some contacts through this community. It's not as easy as just showing up someplace and saying, hey, I exist. So I think the first person that I met was Robert Hanna, because he also had my same scholarship, a Fulbright, but he went to the US instead. It's bilateral. So I met him, and then through him, he put me in contact with other people who were involved in the Federation in particular. So then I just started to come to events. I spoke to them individually. That's how I made my first entry into the community.
And for those who don't know, Robert is a Swedish Assyrian politician in the Swedish parliament. So you've written a report named Assyrians Under Kurdish Rule. Can you tell us a little about that report?
Absolutely. This report was the first report released by the Assyrian Confederation of Europe, which I really like because I was at the inauguration of the Confederation, so that was quite important for me. And it was an idea or an initiative from the chairman of the Assyrian Federation of Sweden at the time, Afram Yakub. And it was written as a way to counterbalance the major narrative that is currently going on about the war in Syria, in particular in the north where there are more Assyrians. So it discusses the issues and different events that have occurred to the Assyrian community in the north of Syria, who are kind of caught between the Syrian regime but also the growing strength of different parties, in particular the Kurdish powers in the north.
I know that your report is highly appreciated by several Assyrians, but also non-Assyrians, because you highlight, as you said, an issue that's not mainstream in the media. We get to read a lot about Bashar and then the anti-Bashar militias. But however, we can see that strong militias as the Kurdish militias, etc., in northeastern Syria actually oppressed Assyrians and the Arabs and other ethnic minorities. So it was refreshing to read your report, and so thank you for that.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
How was the reception you got for the report? Because I know that it is a little bit controversial to criticize specifically Kurdish parties or Kurdish militias in the Middle East, because they are always seen as only the good cop in the Middle East.
So far, most of the reception that I have seen has been positive. Of course, I have seen some critique, but I don't think I wrote it. It's not to just highlight negative things. It's also you have to counterbalance every narrative and also show things that are occurring. And it's based on reports from the Federation, from other groups, as well as interviews that I did with people who have lived there, who have seen, or not, in particular one person who is still living there. She was just here on a visit. So it's good to highlight different things that are occurring, and not just, and no party in this situation is 100% correct. So it's good to just be aware of different things that are occurring, I think.
Beside the report that you just talked about, you have written a thesis about Assyrians named Diaspora Roles and Integration in a Host Country, a study of Swedish Assyrians in particularly Stockholm. Would you tell us about that? How come that you wrote a thesis about Assyrians?
Sure. So since I'd been here already, as I said, 1 year, just kind of researching, and then I was doing my master's, I kind of thought about what to focus on for my thesis. Of course, Assyrians were my main topic, but I was very interested in this Assyrian kind of national movement, Assyrian nationalist identity and movement that is quite, from what I can see, quite strong here. And so it's based on interviews. In anthropology, we typically it's more based on in-depth interviews as well as research reports, things like this. So it's based on interviews with different Assyrians, especially politically engaged and at different ages, everything, kind of different people.
What was your impression of the Assyrians in Sweden? Were they accepting the fact that they are now living in Sweden, or did a lot of them, because you said that they were mainly politically active, did they have a strong home longing, or what was your impression?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely got the impression that there are some Assyrians who are more patriotic about their Assyrian identity. Maybe, they long more to go back to a homeland. They really aspire towards that. And then at the same time, there are many who just have acknowledged that they are in diaspora. They don't see a return to an Assyria as a possible thing. Even if there was one, maybe they don't see themselves as being able to adapt to that anymore.
Yeah, because it is actually there are quite differences between living in the Middle East and then living in Europe. It's, the freedom of expression and the roles of lives, and so living in the diaspora it changes you. However, in the Middle East, our language was forbidden in a time, and we couldn't maintain our language or culture overall, as we can do here in Sweden. Was there something that you also recognized when you did your thesis, or when you talked about Assyrians? Because here in Sweden, we actually get financial help from the state to maintain our culture.
Yeah, that's something that I thought was very interesting, was that maybe it's not the ideal to live in a diaspora, but at the same time, maybe some things like language and culture are almost better preserved in a diaspora, or particularly in a state system that kind of that finances and preserves these kinds of, for example, one big thing that I thought about was that, or that I noticed, is that Assyrians here now have a movement towards schools in Assyrian, and there's a lot of media produced here in Assyrian, things that weren't encouraged in the Middle East or even allowed in a lot of cases. So this was quite interesting for me, that a diaspora doesn't have to mean that you will lose everything or that you will immediately assimilate, but rather it can also, by getting some freedom from the state that you have moved into, you can now actually preserve things better and encourage more better media, better literature, lots of things in your culture that you weren't able to do before.
It's funny to think about it, because if you want to, we can be more Assyrian in Sweden than in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So your thesis actually won an award from the Assyrian Youth Federation as the thesis of the year. How was that to win the award? How did it feel?
It was really great, of course. Yeah, I was very happy to receive that, in particular because, I mean, I'm not Assyrian myself, so it feels good to have it acknowledged that it was, you know, sort of approved of in a way by the people that I worked with, because ultimately I did write it with good intentions towards the Assyrian community, try to contribute to, you know, some kind of knowledge about Assyrians, or to contribute to how people know about Assyrians. So it was good to know that it was well received.
I know that me, as an Assyrian myself, we always feel more grateful when non-Assyrians highlight our question. It gives more strength to the cause. So I know that many people were extremely happy reading your thesis. So well deserved.
Thank you.
And so how does your future plans look like? You are originally from Costa Rica, and you have lived in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia as well, and now you're in Sweden. Where do you see yourself in the future?
Yeah, right now it's a bit up in the air for myself. I like Sweden. I've lived here almost 4 years, so right now I'm happy to stay here, and I'm working and doing different things, but I just finished my master's in October, so I'm still transitioning a little bit towards figuring out what I'm doing. I would really like to perhaps do a PhD in the future and focus on similar types of issues. So that may be a plan, but probably in the coming year or so I will start to do that more seriously.
Can we expect more work regarding the Assyrians from you? More reports or paperworks?
I hope so. Right now I don't have anything coming up. But I hope, as I said, I hope to maybe start a PhD or do something more in the research field. So hopefully in the future there will be something more.
Thank you so much for attending our show today. And thank you very much for your contribution to the Assyrian cause with your reports and with your thesis. And we hope to see more of you here. You're always welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.